Om Stapakaya cha dharmasya sarvadharmaswarupine avataravarishthaya Ramakrishnaya te namah. So now today I am planning to give a recapitulation of the different doctrines that I discussed earlier on Ramanuja philosophy. Because after this, we will enter into some very interesting dialectical views which are special to Ramanuja system from the next session onwards. So today I shall give a kind of informal recapitulation. So to give a background, you have to remember there are altogether 6 schools of Vedanta, and these 6 schools of Vedanta are Advaita, Vishishtadvaita, Advaita of Sri Shankaracharya, and Vishishtadvaita of Ramanuja, and then the tradition of Nimbarka, which is sometimes called Hamsa Sampradaya, the Rudra Sampradaya of Vallabha, Brahma Sampradaya of Madhvacharya, is a Dvaita system, and Chaitanya's Achintya, Bheda, Abheda. These are traditional names. In a way, we can say Advaita implies a kind of transcendental monism, which accepts all other traditions but emphasizes that there is a higher transcendental level when you realize the absolute reality is not one personal God with attributes, but rather an impersonal, or we may call it transpersonal. Impersonal can have scope for misunderstanding. We call it transpersonal, trans-empirical, trans-monotheistic tradition. So it accommodates everything but goes beyond monotheism. So then Ramanuja system is pure monotheism, very similar to the Abrahamic tradition, which is more of a theology than a philosophy. This is important. To give an example, I can make this clear. One important reason why modern historians of Western philosophy, like Bertrand Russell, didn't give much importance to the theologies, the theological systems of Augustine Aquinas. And sometimes they downgraded many of the theological systems as something inferior to philosophy. It's a very interesting you find. So theology is a God-centered system of thought based on some revealed scriptures which are open to rational inquiry and which may not stand the questions, the test of rational inquiry. This is the view of many of the modern historians of Western philosophy. And the father of that tradition, the hierarchy, is Bertrand Russell, who was an agnostic, not an atheist, but as an agnostic, with deep regard for many of the great philosophers of Christian tradition. That's because a great devotional philosopher like Spinoza will be considered to be more of a theologian than a philosopher. But Advaita is as much a theology as it is a philosophy. Because Shankaracharya emphasizes that we should go beyond revealed scriptures. I have given this, I have mentioned this earlier, Srutya, Yuktya, Swanubhutya. Okay, you listen to scriptures, the Bible, maybe the Saint Avesta, the Talmud, or the Torah, everything you read. But then you should use your reasoning power. Don't believe blindly. That is a very important point that Shankaracharya mentions. You listen to scriptures, Sruti, through revealed scriptures, then through reasoning. And then you should bring it into your life. Now, remember, in Christian theology also, this really happened, but it was not accepted or appreciated by the mainstream church. But in Indian system, it was the mainstream. Mysticism or going beyond books and beyond logic was the mainstream in Hinduism, especially in Advaita Vedanta. but in non-Ramanuja system. Ramanuja system is very similar to the theological systems of Abrahamic traditions and may not stand the test of inquiry by men like Bertrand Russell. So that is the special feature of Advaita. I am trying to give the distinct characteristics of Advaita in the light of Western philosophical or theological tradition. So the next one is Ramanuja. Vishnu Narayana, or Sri Lakshmi, Vishwakarma, Shatakoba, Natamuni. You can find a host of, let's say, one supreme Godhead and a number of his assistants and lieutenants you find in Ramanuja system. Very similar to Christian theology. And all the angels who sang and rejoiced at the birth of Jesus Christ, you can meet in Ramanuja system. So many of them you find. And then there is the Dvaita system of Madhvacharya. In Madhvacharya system, you will find something very, very, unfortunately I would say, something very similar to some of the questionable doctrines, in my opinion, of course, of Islamic faith, where there is a clear line of demarcation between this and that, black and white. There are some people who are eternal residents in hell. Even if they want to come out, they cannot come out. But Jesus Christ will, of course, will admit them if they accept Christ as the Son of God. If they take refuge in Jesus, Christ will accept. But Madhvacharya's God will have absolutely nothing to doing with that. He will just expel them because they are supposed to permanently reside in hell. Nitya Naraga Siddhanta, this is called in Sanskrit, the doctrine of eternal damnation, which is very special to Madhvacharya system in Indian philosophy. You don't find anywhere else this. Then we have Nimbarka, Vallabha, and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. More or less very similar to they are almost similar because they all accept one aspect of Lord Vishnu as the Supreme God and all other paraphernalia of that monotheistic God you find. Now, I already explained this earlier. You know, the Ramanuja system is sometimes called Ubhaya Vedanta. That's because, unlike Shankaracharya, Ramanuja accepts not only the Vedas but also some of the teachings of an earlier group of great devotees who mostly taught in Tamil language. And for those of you who are not familiar with Indian vernacular languages, Tamil is the second oldest language in Indian subcontinent. It's a Dravidian language. So you find in Shankaracharya system, he accepts only the Vedas. So almost like I would say Shankaracharya system is like a straight cut royal highway. He doesn't look left or right. He doesn't enter into any of the sidelines or bylines. Absolutely nothing doing. There is straight cut road, he goes. Ramanuja says not, no. There are some sidelines. You should also consider them as different options for traveling. So Ramanuja accepts this Nalayira Prabandham is called. 4,000 teachings of the earlier school of great devotional teachers. They were all great saints who belonged to the Tamil, the old tradition. Tamil is the oldest of the South Indian languages. So a large part of today's South India had this Tamil as the lingua franca till maybe around maybe 9th century or 10th century AD. So Ramanuja accepts this contribution of the Tamil text. So it is called Ubhaya Vedanta. So that is one important thing. In the sense that he accepted two traditions. And some of his canonical works, for example, his own commentary on Brahma Sutras, which is called Sri Bhashya, his own commentary on Bhagavad Gita, and then Gita Artha Sangraha, which is a fairly small book, and then other great thinkers of Ramanuja system, of whom Sudarshana Suri and Vedanta Desika. Sudarshana Suri wrote a glose or tiga, or a small glose, small super commentary on Ramanuja's own Sri Bhashya, his commentary on Brahma Sutras, and Vedanta Desika, who wrote a large number of important canonical works in the Ramanuja system, who laid the foundation for the philosophical edifice of Ramanuja system. So, Talpirya Chandrika, Ishavasi, and so on. So, this is all about the canonical tradition of Ramanuja system. Now, coming again to another point, important point. I often, I try to make the Ramanuja system, we give a clear picture of Ramanuja system by comparing it to Shankaracharya, because historically Shankara comes first, 8th century, Ramanuja 12th century. So Ramanuja gives a lot of importance to certain practices, external rituals and practices, and also certain external symbols. So you find Ramanuja's followers have certain mandatory rituals, putting the mark on the sandal paste or mark on the forehead, and then certain other, it's more like it is similar, very similar to a cult. That will make it is almost like a cult. You know what's a cult? A cult is a distinct group. They have their own strict code of conduct, practices, a hierarchy, and a very strong tradition of do's and don'ts. This is the speciality of a cult. The Ramanuja system is more of a cult. Now, a much more important thing, what is the distinct contribution of Ramanuja to Indian philosophy, or the word philosophy, broadly speaking? I mentioned this earlier at the very beginning, the concept of self-surrender. This is articulated in a very graphic style by Ramanuja. You can find this surrender idea in many traditions, especially in the Christian mystical tradition. And I am of the view that I am not familiar with the original teachings of Russian mystics, but what we have access to the teachings of Saint Teresa of Avila. Though she was a Spanish saint, all her writings have been translated into English. So I would say Saint Teresa of Avila's concept of evolution, of going deeper and deeper, which is called inner castle, is in a way the most graphic description of this inward journey of a mystic, going deeper and deeper into his own or her own mystical experience of self-surrender and direct communion with the divine without the intervention of a hierarchy in the form of a church or a ecclesiastical hierarchy. So that's what you find in Ramanuja system. So you can directly establish a hotline with God, and this can be done through prapatti or self-surrender. And he has given a very extensive, very scientific, very rational, and very psychological interpretation of this concept of self-surrender, which he calls prapatti, self-surrender. So this self-surrender has got 6 components. One of them the central theme, the other 5 are different aspects of the central principle. The central principle is Atma Nikshepa, surrendering oneself to the divine self, that is to Ramanuja's idea of God, that is Saguna Sakara Savishesha, an idea of a God as Narayana, an aspect of Vishnu, which is an idea of a God which is personal in nature, with certain unique characteristics, let's say totality of all that is positive, and then which is full of all that is auspicious, Sagala, Kalyana, Guna, Niti, all these terms are used. I mean, a repository of all that is auspicious, positive and exalted. So, Anugulisha Sankalpaka, Pradigulisha Varjanam, Rakshasriti Vishwasa, Goptrutta Varanam Tatha, Atmanikshepa Karpane Shadvidha Sharanagati. These are 6 forms of Sharanagati. To be more precise, that Sharanagati is Atmanikshepa, that is self-surrender, and other are 5 components called Angas, and self-surrender is Angi. For example, doing or accepting, listening to all that is agreeable, auspicious, positive to your idea of God. So one should be very careful to avoid listening to anything that may shake your faith in God. All that you find in Christian mystical tradition also you find. In fact, in the Russian mystical tradition, they have this practice of repeating Jesus' prayer all the time in a continuous, perpetual repetition, succession of the same positive thought all the time. That's very important for a person who is trying to surrender God. So there is an element of risk in that. That's because if you don't repeat the name of God, then what happens? Negative thoughts may invade your mind and may shake your conviction. So there is a kind of insecurity. In Advaita system, once you have realized your essential identity with the divine, then there is absolutely no such thing as something that is disagreeable. That's why the second component in the self-surrender concept of Ramanuja is pradikulyasya varjanam, means avoiding whatever may be disagreeable or displeasing to God. So you should be always watchful about. You should be always ready to run away from a negative thought current. This in Christian tradition may be called temptation of Satan. So that's always the problem. The same thing, so always you should connect yourself to the divine. Augustine's that city of God, you can find one should always open our heart to the divine grace. So, pradikulyasya varjanam. In Advaita, there is no such thing as something disagreeable. What you consider to be disagreeable is a state of ignorance. So, you should not be always in a state of fear. Oh, will something happen to me that may shake my conviction? If such a thought comes, immediately we can dismiss, oh, that's that thought. We need not worry too much about that thought. That thought is irrelevant. That's why in Advaitic spiritual sadhana, when our mind is disturbed, the disturbing thought should not be deliberately avoided, but should not be welcomed. You may witness. That means it becomes irrelevant. If you always are waiting for the invasion of a negative thought so that you want to run away from it, then mind will be always in a state of instability. On the other hand, if an unwelcoming thought that you call negativity sometimes, if that comes, all right, you come and do whatever you want, but I am not bothered much about it. And these negative thoughts will stop coming. The Advaitic sadhana. In Vishishtadvaita, no, you should be very careful. Get away from it. Don't. So, the pradikulyasya varjanam. And then, rakshasiddhi vishwasaha. One should consider oneself to be totally helpless, in a total destitute. Karpanyam it is called. Means you can't do anything. Everything depends upon God. Your own total helplessness. That often you find in Christian prayer tradition. You are entirely at the mercy of the Lord. That's part of the Jesus prayer in according to St. Paul's first epistle. have mercy on me, Jesus, Son of God, have mercy on me. So you are always in a state of total helplessness. It's very similar. And then you should have strong faith. That is, it's called technically in the Vaishnavite tradition, it is called Mahavishwasaha. But in Goptrutta, that's a total faith. So Anugulyasya Sankalpa, Pradugulyasya Varjanam, Rakshasiridi Vishwasaha. So God will protect me. That is that. It's called Mahavishwasaha. God is the savior of all. Again, very similar to Jesus' prayer. Then Goptrutta Varanam, God is the sole protector. Everything depends upon His grace. So these five elements constitute the essence of self-surrender in Ramanuja's concept of self-surrender. In Ramanuja's system of self-surrender, articulated so graphically in his commentary works and also in the Gadyatraya, in Sharanagati Gadyam, means it is a book exclusively devoted to the idea of self-surrender. Sharanagati is self-surrender. And there is Sriranga Gadyam, Ramanuja's own deity or monotheistic God. That is the deity of Sriranga, the great temple in South India. So, this is a very, very important principle in Ramanuja, this prapatti. And then, of course, just few more important things. Okay. Now, here one important thing. What's the difference between devotion and prapatti? So, I think I made this clear. Without some kind of self-surrender, no one can become a devotee. But at the same time, at the beginning of your devotional life, you cannot bring yourself to this exalted state of self-surrender. That doesn't happen in Christian mysticism also. So self-surrender is, in the evolution of a devotee, is the last. But it also is present at the beginning. There is one element of self-surrender at the beginning. And that's it is called bhakti. Bhakti means devotion. So, in the bhakti state, when you are a devotee, you need to study some scriptures and you should do some rituals, prayer, meditation, reading, reciting certain prayers, hymns and things like that. And also, you should practice certain do's and don'ts. All these are, and you should have a strong will. Then only you can face obstacles. You can, if you read the autobiography of Saint Teresa of Avila, you can find her own mind sometimes poses problems, and she is very much aware of that. Another book is Inner Warfare. These books, yeah, you have a very graphic description. It's pure devotion. It has a great relevance from the Patanjali Yoga point of view and also from the standpoint of devotional life. So suddenly a mind alerts you, oh, here is a problem arising, I should be watchful. That is for a devotee. But when you surrender yourself, all these are gone, you are connected with the transcendental. Then all warfare comes to an end. That is prapatti. That is the ultimate. So in Sanskrit it's called sadhana and sadhya. Sadhya means something that is your goal to be attained. That is sadhya. Sadhana means means and methods, practices, which constitute the road, the path leading to goal. So at the stage of spiritual evolution, when you are following the road leading to the supreme goal, then you should follow certain do's and don'ts. You should read scriptures, you should listen to teachers, and you should practice certain do's and don'ts. And then there is a kind of uncertainty. So you should be very careful to keep your mind always tuned to positive thoughts ideas and thoughts, emotions which are positive or helpful in spiritual life, and again keep away from harmful thoughts and emotions which could be harmful to spiritual life. So there is an element of insecurity at the bhakti level, at the sadhana level, when you are practicing spiritual sadhana. At the sadhya level, you have closed the bargain. Actually, you yourself are irrelevant. I gave this example. It's just like pouring milk in an empty glass, where you get one glass full of pure milk. Suppose the glass is half full of water, maybe muddy water. You pour milk, you have got only a glass full of liquid, which is water and milk mixed up. So when you empty yourself, this again is very similar to Christian tradition, where you empty your mind so that you open your heart for the divine to pour in, to fill your heart. That's a different concept which I may deal with when I discuss Chaitanya's system of devotional philosophy. There are strong teachings in Baladevas and Chaitanya, and to Goswamis, Jiva Goswami's system you find. Emptying the glass and filling the glass and all that. And it's a different thing. So, when you empty yourself, then you reach Prapatti. You are filled with the divine. And there the bargain comes to an end. That's a hotline. So that stage, that's the highest stage of one's spiritual evolution. So the greatness of Ramanuja was that he very clearly articulates all these in his works and also in his tradition. So, and of course his idea of God also, the Lord is, he says, Saulabhyam, Paratvam, Bhagavan, all these he mentions, that is, God is supreme, and God is the divine. Vasudeva Narayana is the supreme, and is easily accessible if you practice Prapatti. If you practice Prapatti, that's the end of the journey, and then God becomes a reality in our everyday experience. So this is sometimes put in a simple formula. When it becomes a formula, there's the danger of it becoming mechanical process. Like going to a church every week and you confess, and next day, Monday morning, again you begin your previous life. It's every week a kind of license renewal. So that's a great risk of all days becoming too much of a formality. That's why we call Ananya Gaditvam and Aginjanyam. These two terms are frequently used in the Sri Vaishnava tradition. If it becomes a reality, you become a great devotee overnight. But otherwise, it can become a mechanical process. So, one is Ananya Gaditva, means for Jiva, you have nowhere to go, no other goal, nothing else to do, except, and Lord is the only refuge. And then you yourself are totally helpless, you are a destitute. It's called Aginjanyam and Ananya Gaditvam. These ideas are frequently quoted. So if self-surrender becomes a reality, it is hotline, it is almost identical with moksha. So these ideas are being put again and again, Bhakti Prabhati Pramukham Tat Vashigara Karanam. That is a great statement in the Rahasya Traya Sara, which is a well-known book by Vedanta Desika. So anyway, so I already mentioned this earlier, so I don't want to go to elaborately again to those things. Now another important principle, and this is very important, is a very important element of Ramanuja's system of Prapatti. I don't think there is anything comparable to this in any other devotional tradition. Even within the realm of Hinduism itself, there are great books on devotional philosophy. One is Narada's Bhakti Siddhanta, Bhakti Ideal, Narada Bhakti Sutras, and Chandilya's Bhakti Sutras, and also innumerable other books on bhakti. You can find Bhagavata Purana is a very important, maybe the most supreme text on bhakti as a supreme devotion philosophy. But then even there you don't find such a clear articulation. It becomes almost a deliberate process. So in this in his well-known book, it's called Nyasa Dashakam, is the one great Ramanuja philosopher I mentioned earlier, Vedanta Desika Venkatanatha, is credited with writing a very wonderful commentary on Ramanuja's own Bhashya or commentary on Bhagavad Gita. It's called Nyasa Deshakam. Nyasa means giving up, Tyaga, renouncing. So there he says, Aham mat dakshana bharam phalam tatha na mama sripade eva iti atmanam nikshiped vrudha swamin susesham suvasam subharatvena nirbharam sudatta sudhiya swartham susmin nyasyasi mam soyam. So again, aham na mama, everything is yours, not mine. So this idea of total self-surrender means everything is meant to serve God's purposes, and I am entirely dependent upon you, and my whole responsibility is given to you. That goes subharatvena nirbhara means madrakshana bharo namama. Everything is yours. I completely surrender to you. So whatever I do, it is not mine, that is yours. My action, the results of my action, everything is given to you. Bharanyasa, or surrender of the responsibility of protection and safeguarding our life. So it is called this Bharanyasa. Nyasa means giving up. Bhara means responsibility. So the responsibility of our spiritual life, everything is given to the Lord. So also the responsibility for a protection, that is Raksha Bharanyasa, means you are not only giving up the results of your actions and also the agentship of your actions, that is called Surupatyaga, Palatyaga, Kartrutyaga, and also Bharanyasa, surrender of responsibilities, and also responsibility for our own protection, that is called Raksha Bharanyasa. Now remember, Ramanuja considers the 66th verse of Bhagavad Gita as the supreme statement of this Bharanyasa, and again Surupatyaga and Palatyaga, Raksha Bharatyaga, etc. That is Sarvadharman Parityajya Mamekam Saranam Vraja Aham Tva Sarvapabhebhyo Mokshashyami Masuja. This is supreme statement in Ramanuja's system. That is called Charamasloka. It is the verse that states clearly Ramanuja's philosophy of self-surrender. That means you give up all your spiritual practices, Sarvadharman, all over you do, all that you are doing. You may have practiced Jnana Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Karma Yoga, everything. Everything you have done it. Now you feel you are incapable of doing anything. You are a destitute. So what you should do? You surrender yourself, everything to the Lord. Mamekam Saranam Vraja. So I am the supreme refuge. So this Bharanyasa, Surupanyasa, Rakshabharanyasa means giving up the results of your actions, giving up the agentship of your actions, and also giving up the responsibility of protection. Everything is given to the Lord. And then I will protect you. Do not grieve. This is a literal translation. And once you do that, everything belongs to the Lord. That's a closing of the bargain. Now, if you come to Gita, you find this comes to the end of the 18th chapter, this statement of self-surrender in the 18th chapter, that is Sarvadharman Parityaja. But Gita continues. Gita doesn't stop the 66th verse. I think the 18th chapter goes to 72nd. And then Lord Krishna, finally he says, he asked this question, Kachideda Sudam Partha Taya Egagrena Chedasa Kachidajnana Sammoha Pranastaste Dhananchaya. Krishna asked Arjuna, did you listen to my teachings carefully? Have your doubts gone? Now are you free from all your doubts and confusions and perplexities? And Arjuna says, Nashto moha smidil labdha tut prasadar maya achyuda sthidosmi gata sandeha karishe vajanam tava. Yes, my doubts are gone and all my confusions gone. Then he doesn't say, oh God, please act on my behalf. Arjuna says, Aham tava vajanam karishe. Karishe means the first person. I shall act according to your instruction. I am giving, you do everything for me. Arjuna doesn't say that. After the statement of self-surrender, Krishna asks Arjuna the question, have you listened to me carefully? Arjuna says, okay, yes. And then Arjuna says, I shall act according to your instruction. So what's the implication of self-surrender? After self-surrender, you don't sit quiet. You do your duty. This is a very important point. I gave the example of Vedanta Desika asking the priests who were making some arrangements to protect, to defend Srirangam temple. When Malik Kafur, Alauddin Khilji general, was ransacking, committing genocide, massacre, thousands of priests in Srirangam temple. So some of the Ramanuja's philosophers, Vedanta Desika's follow. This happened maybe 120, 150 years after Ramanuja's passing away, not during his time. This happened after about more than 100 years after Ramanuja's passing away. Maybe, around 100 years or so after his passing away. So Vedanta Desika was fleeing from that place. And Sudarsana Suri had handed over the only available manuscript, the written manuscript of Sudip Prakashika. That is a glose, super commentary on Ramanuja's own commentary on Brahma Sutra. It's called Sudip Prakashika, that is a commentary on Sri Bhashya, which again is a commentary on Brahma Sutras. So Vedanta Desika was running away to safeguard this book, and some people came to defend the temple. Vedanta says, why do you defend? You have practiced self-surrender. But Arjuna didn't think so. Arjuna continued his duty. You do surrender. When you surrender, you are surrendering responsibility. You are not surrendering your duty. What happens to my action, that is your business. But I shall act. That was what Arjuna meant when he said Karishe Vajanam Tava. It was the end of the Gita. And then, Yatra Yogeshwara Krishna Yatra Partho Dhanudhara Tatra Sri Vijayo Bhudi Dhruva Nitir Madir Mama. That's how Gita ends, the last verse of the 18th chapter. Wherever there is an Arjuna, with a symbol of action. And wherever there is a Lord Krishna, symbol of yoga. When they combine together, Tatra Sri Vijayo Bodhi Dhruvanidi, there will be stable social order, there will be justice, there will be victory, there will be prosperity. So Vedanta Desika, on the other hand, so you have no right to defend the temple, you have performed self-surrender. So why am I pointing out? So when we discuss a system of philosophy, especially Ramanuja's philosophy, there is a very interesting historical background in which Ramanuja lived and also Vedanta Desika lived. So we can see the picture. So our scripture, Bhagavad Gita and other books, they asked us not to give up what we ought to do, but to give up worry about the results of what we are doing. So there is this inner contradiction. This is not entirely, this is closely linked to Ramanuja's system of philosophy, but I wanted to mention this because without that, my description of Ramanuja's system of philosophy, especially his self-surrender idea, will not be complete if somebody is going to ask the question, well, Swamiji, if you are surrendering everything, what happens when we have to do our everyday duties? People may ask this question. Can we actually surrender everything and sit quiet? We cannot and we do not. So there can be a problem of hypocrisy unless we understand this in the light of the great text Bhagavad Gita itself. That's what I wanted to emphasize. Now coming back to the subject. Later I will come to the subject. So Ramanuja's idea of God I already mentioned. So you can find that Ramanuja says there is no distinction between Saguna and Nirguna. And Advaita says Saguna and Nirguna are distinct because when you reach the level of Nirguna, the transcendental, the formless, you are not rejecting the form, you are going beyond form. So this is a very subtle difference we have to understand. Most of the misunderstandings in modern world, where people sometimes say Ramanuja's system is right, Shankaracharya system is wrong, or Shankaracharya system is right, Ramanuja is wrong. All these wrong ideas are based on one problem. If you accept one, it doesn't mean that you are rejecting the other. It is not relativism. Again, we should not understand. It's not a kind of lazy, relativistic interpretation of things. It is absolute principle. So, Advaita transcends, goes beyond form, the idea of a God with form and attributes. Advaita does not reject the idea of a God with form and with attributes. The simple demonstration can be found in the very fact that Shankaracharya himself was the author of some of the most profound devotional poetry in Sanskrit, which extols the idea of God with form and with attributes. But he says one can and one should also try to go beyond form. And those who have read the life of Sri Ramakrishna, you will remember, Sri Ramakrishna was being taught, he was undergoing training under Totapuri in Advaita discipline. So Sri Ramakrishna did not reject the divine mother's image. Sri Ramakrishna went beyond that. So when the idea of God with form was still coming again and again, and Sri Ramakrishna found it difficult to go beyond, then Totapuri went round and took a piece of crystal and pierced on his forehead and asked Sri Ramakrishna to concentrate on that. Then what happened to Sri Ramakrishna was that his mind went beyond, but his mind did not reject. Because after that discipline, he continued his life as a great devotee of the divine. Shankaracharya wrote all the devotional poetry after reaching the Advaita experience. Remember that? He went to Kanchipuram and he recited Saundarya Lahari. He went to Sri Shailam, Mahakalesha temple, he recited Shivaparada Dakshamavana Stotra. He was staying in Omkareshwar, the Yamunashtakam, and he was staying in Kashi, Gangashtakam. So all these poems extolling the divinity of these auspicious river systems, which became auspicious because great devotees and saints were living in the banks of river Ganga and river Yamuna. You can still find. All that he wrote long after reaching Advaita experience. Remember? And he says, in one context, one of his well-known verse, he says, is a kind of, he puts himself in the position of a humble devotee and says, in my life, I did not recite your holy name, I did not take bath in the Ganga. I did not practice meditation. I am a sinner. Please save me. He puts himself in the position of a humble, spiritual kindergarten child. This person, Shankaracharya. This he did after writing all the magnificent, highly dialectical works, classical works on Advaita, and then he writes himself, he puts himself in the position of a humble devotee. Oh mother, I did not chant your mantra. Shivaparada Kshamavana Sutram. It is an apology, list of apologies to Lord Shiva. Oh, I did not go to Kashi, I did not put Bilwa leaf on, I did not chant your mantra. All that he does after Advaita. So that means, as a system of philosophy, it transcends. As an experience, it transcends. But in real life, you don't reject anything, you go beyond it. A professor teaching in Oxford, he cannot say, I've studied this alphabet when I was in kindergarten. No, I won't use English alphabet. How will he write his thesis? You have to use the same alphabet you have to use which you study when you are a child of 2 years, 3 years, going to kindergarten. So this is an important thing. So that means, so Shankaracharya's system, it is a very complete system of philosophy. Remember, again we should not get away with the impression that Ramanuja was wrong or anything. Absolutely no. Ramanuja was a great humanist. In Ramanuja you find another aspect of this spiritual philosophy. That's all. That's the greatness of Hinduism. Hinduism doesn't say he is wrong and that's right. No. Again I want to emphasize, this is not a kind of relativism. It is not a relativistic interpretation. It's a fact. In spiritual life, you cannot be a relativist. In spiritual life, as you move forward, you are leaving certain early stages behind, but you don't reject the early stages because then you cannot move forward. So again, Ramanuja's system, he accepted the Upanishadic interpretation of Nirguna. At the same time, he says that attributes are only qualities and characteristics of the Brahman. They are qualities and characteristics of Brahman. Shankaracharya would say, attributes are real only so long as you have not realized the attributeless dimension of the real. When you go beyond attributes, you realize that the spiritual reality cannot even be defined in terms of name, form and attributes. So he says, for example, third chapter, Sarvam Khalidam Brahma, Manase Vedamaptavyam, Nehananasti Kinchana. And again, you can find all these statements, if they are obviously Advaitic, but Ramanuja says, Surupa, Nirupana, Dharma Shabdahi, Dharma Mukhena, Surupamabi, Pradivadayanti, Tathakitu, Sutrakaraka, Tadguna Saratva, Tu, Tad Vyapadesha Prajnavadi. He's actually taking an interesting statement from Brahma Sutra. So I think now I will take up some very important aspects not mentioned here. Just this recapitulation will be complete only when we take up some other important things. So I mentioned earlier that Ramanuja's system is called Chit Achit Visishta. So that we should keep in mind. It's called Vishishtadvaita. So Chit Achit Visishta, what does it mean? Chit implies everything in this world. Basically got life. We just got, say, human beings, animals, all these have got a living divine spark within. And the empirical phenomenal world doesn't have a living divine spark as the indweller, in is called Antaryami. So, Ramanuja's idea of God is actually an Advaitic and non-dualistic concept, but conditioned and modified and qualified by this inherent division. That means that divine, it exists as an indweller in every living beings in this world and also in every non-living organism. So Achit is non-living phenomenal world. Chit is living beings. So that divinity, that God exists in everything. And everything in this world is an evolute of the divine. That is considered Tattvatraya, means Ishvara, Jiva and Jagat. Ishvara, the Supreme God, called Narayana, and the Supreme God exists as an indweller, as an immanent principle in every living being and in every entity in the world. So on the one hand, there is the element of non-dualism because in everything there is the presence of the divine. So there is not entirely different, but at the same time there is no identity. In Shankara system, Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya Jivo Brahmaiva Naparaka means Brahman is only reality, Jiva is non-distinct and non-different from Brahman, is the same as Brahman, identical. So what is Jiva? I mentioned this earlier by interpreting Tattvamayana. Jiva is not the living beings. Jiva here implies the divine principle that exists in all living beings, but not the body-mind complex. But that Jiva, that soul, makes use of this body-mind complex for its manifestation. And when it manifests, it has got different names and different forms, Nama, Rupa. These names and forms are only relative. It's called Mithya. Mithya again, Mithya doesn't imply absolute non-reality, absolute non-existence. Mithya implies something that exists, but not for all times. Something which exists for some time, but always changing. So it is called Mithya. So, but behind this changing manifestations, there is an unchanging reality, divine spark, that is one with Brahman. This is Advaita. So, in the Ramananda system, in everything there is a divine reality, the presence of the divine. But there is no identity because Ramanuja understands that name and form make some kind of distinction. So there cannot be total identity. So there is Bheda, difference, and there is also non-difference. So it is not a Bheda Siddhanta, there is a little difference here. So Ramanuja calls it Surupa Aikyam. Vedantins, Advaita calls it Swarupa Aikyam, Ramanuja calls it Vishishtaikyam. Please, sometimes this misunderstanding will come. So Ramanuja calls it Vishishtaikyam. Vishishtaikyam means there is unity, oneness, identity, but that is Vishishta, that is conditioned. That's why Vishishtadvaita. There is unity and oneness and identity, but it is Vishishta, it is conditioned. In the sense, names and forms are there, so they cannot be totally identical. But at the same time, they are not totally distinct and different. So there is unity, there is abheda, there is at the same time distinction, there is bheda. Ramanuja calls it Vishishtaikyam. In Shankara system, it is called Sarupaikyam. What is Sarupaikyam? Inherently, essentially, all these different ornaments made of gold the necklace, the ring, all these are inherently, fundamentally, essentially non-distinct, because you remove all these different forms, the names also disappear, they become the same gold. So from gold you make rings and necklaces and different ornaments. You melt, it goes back to gold. So when you are wearing in your neck, this is a gold necklace. This is a different shape, rupa, and different name, nama. That is true. But then inherently it is not different from a ring that you wear in your finger. That's what Shankaracharya says. That is Swarupa Aikyam. Essentially, inherently, by the very nature, according to the pristine nature, it is the same. Ramanuja says no. Gold is present in necklace. Gold is present in ring. But still, they are different names and forms. So Ramanuja says there is unity because it is gold, but there is a distinction because it has different forms. So it's called Vishishtadvaita in Ramanuja, Swarupa in Shankaracharya. So I think this recapitulation will continue because this phase should be made very clear before we take up the next subject. It will be dialectical. No, you can ask questions, most welcome.
You mentioned early on that Ramanuja accepted some of the earlier Tamil texts.
Yeah.
And that's pretty, interesting. Yeah. I'm wondering about the character of those texts and whether they were devotional in character or whether they were focused on ritual and how much philosophy they may have contained.
Okay. No, I must first of all, I must state that I have not read those books in the original because I don't understand the language. But I have read translations into my own vernacular and also into English. So based on my understanding, I would say they are deeply mystical and deeply devotional. More than philosophy, you find more of an intimate, mystical touch in all of them. Because they're called arvors. They were all great saints, and some of them were even women. And so they were great saints, and they were great devotees. Some of them went around in society singing devotional hymns to different deities, but they were deeply mystical, deeply philosophical. There is an element of transcendental mystical touch in all of them. That's what Ramanuja did when he considered Nalayira Prabandhams. I have no access to the original because I don't understand the language as I understand Sanskrit and English, but I have access only through translations. So, okay, I have access to the original Sanskrit text, but I have no access to the ancient.
Well, I just was curious, and I appreciate you going as far as you did in terms of speculating on their character. Yeah. I will say that
they're deeply philosophical. One of them, I repeat, excuse me, one of them is Kulasekara Alvar, who wrote in great Sanskrit, Muguntamala. Kulasekara Alvar was the king of what is now called Kerala, and later he went to Srirangam. So he was a great Sanskrit scholar. So he wrote what could be called one of the most astounding devotional work in Sanskrit, very short. It's called the Muguntamala. He was a king who renounced his kingdom, went to the temple and stayed there for the rest of his lifetime. He was a great emperor. So I have studied his books as far as they're available in Sanskrit. But many of the Arvars wrote in the ancient Tamil language, not modern Tamil, but ancient Tamil, which my understanding through English translations tell me it's a highly mystical, very similar to some of the great ideas in Sufism. So you always feel that the Sufis may have taken many of those ideas from the Nalayira Prabandham, some of the Alvar's mystical songs.
Thank you, Maharaj. The Alvars are endlessly interesting.
Yeah.
And, so this curiosity I had
very
was
wonderful.
leading
Yeah. Thank you.
leaning in that direction of these great antique devotional ancient
And
texts.
they were living among the people, common people. Sanskrit was still the elite language, unfortunately, even now. But ours were common people. They lived among the masses, singing devotional hymns and educating people. They were very wise. They were a lot of pearls of wisdom you find in some of the teachings. Okay. Yeah.
Namaste, Maharaj.
Yeah.
So I was relating to the Bharanyasam,
Yeah.
the concept, not the specifics, where you surrender but continue to do your actions.
Yeah.
I see the parallels of that in Girish Chandra Ghosh's surrender to Sri Ramakrishna,
Yeah.
where he gave the power of attorney, if you will. First I would like to get your comment, and then the continuation is...
I shall reply this. This is a very, very important subject, so I shall focus on this. Now remember, the Bharanyasam has got two dimensions. One, the way of a mystic. When at the end of your long spiritual sadhanas and practices, you reach a state where your own efforts produce no result, that karpanyam. And then you instinctively surrender yourself to the Lord's will. That did happen in the life of Saint Francis of Assisi. He was a soldier. And in Saint Augustine, even in many traditions it happened, this total transformation. But then after total transformation, you find them acting very vigorously. Fine, surprisingly fine. So, this is a very important principle. So, surrender is not the end of human effort, but it is the end of human effort with confidence in our own ability. So, karpanya is a natural, instinctive recognition of the limitations of our own powers, in spite of our best efforts. You may be the most efficient person in the world. It happens in life. It happens sometimes in the life of great mystics. You did everything, but still you just don't, it doesn't click, so to speak. It doesn't happen. And you know very well that it's not your fault. You have done your best. The circumstances are very, very conducive to producing expected results, but it just doesn't happen. Suddenly you feel there is an unknown, invisible hand, which is real, but you don't understand. And then you realize your own helplessness. This happens not by making a statement before a teacher, as the mechanical process goes, as you know very well, but rather it's an inward, intuitive realization of your own helplessness and the presence of something and somebody higher than you who alone can fulfill that vacuum. Remember, this happened to many mystics in Abrahamic tradition, in Jewish tradition and Christian tradition. You can all find it. So, this feeling of helplessness not out of laziness. Remember, without your effort, your surrender will not be complete. It's an important thing. Because real karpanyam, real feeling of helplessness doesn't come unless you make your own effort and then you find it all collapses. Then only the real conviction of your own limitation, the limitation of your own resources, that dawns upon you. It's an important thing. So again, it doesn't come as a conviction, it comes as an inexplicable inner intuitive experience. And then you close the bargain. I have nothing else to do. And that's the beginning of a new life. That's how, very often, not every time, very often that's how the beginning of that's how the life of a saint begins. This is a real implication of Bharanyasam, and actually, It's not taken in that sense literally. You utter before a person, ananyagaditvam and aginchanyam, and you make a statement. This happens in the traditional hierarchical way. It happens just like confession in a church. But that's one thing. But in a real life, it comes in the form of an intuitive experience. And that is something different from. So there is no argument. When it happens to you, you don't even ask questions. See, you ask questions when you have an experience, but not very intensely felt. So you want an explanation. But when you make all your efforts, and then you find you hit the all available doors, they don't open, then suddenly you stand, and then sometimes you find from an unexpected corner a door opens. And then you find as reality. And then you don't go about arguing, because it is totally non-negotiable. Totally, it is not negotiable. No one can contradict you. That's the beginning of a new life. That is the real meaning of Sharanagati or Prapatti. That ought to be understood that way. I hope that's what I'm talking about. Okay?
Yes.
Yeah. Now next, the other part of the question? Yeah.
Now, Maharaj, one small comment. Do you think Sri Girish Chandra Ghosh is Karpanya or Sharanagati or Paranya? How do you define it?
I think that is true. Girish Chandra Ghosh is a great example of the real Prapatti, because he was in Girish Chandra Ghosh's life. The interesting thing is, he knew that he was incapable of getting out of this terrible trap, this addiction to alcohol. Girish Chandra Ghosh's life. For those of you who don't understand, most of you will know, Girish Chandra Ghosh was a devotee of Guru Sri Ramakrishna. He was an outstanding playwright, literary genius in Bengali language. And he was, of course, given to alcoholism and other disagreeable practices. So at the same time, he had a desire to get out of this, but he knew he could not. And finally, he actually surrendered himself to Sri Ramakrishna. Now remember, Sri Ramakrishna says, if you are bitten by a cobra, then you don't struggle much after that. But you are bitten by a water snake, it's a problem for the water snake and a problem for the person who is bitten, So like that, Sri Ramakrishna was a great teacher. So Sri Ramakrishna was a great teacher. So Girish Chandra Ghosh could completely surrender himself to Sri Ramakrishna. And Sri Ramakrishna could transform his life. So actually Sri Ramakrishna's greatness as a teacher and Girish Chandra Ghosh's sincerity and honesty both played an important role in his transformation. Sri Ramakrishna himself says, Girish Chandra Ghosh has some unique quality. He was not a hypocrite. He was a very sincere, honest person. He himself said, well, I can't give you a word, he said. I can't stop drinking. Girish Chandra Ghosh told Sri Ramakrishna. So Sri Ramakrishna admired his sincerity and honesty. Suppose Girish Chandra Ghosh said, all right, tomorrow onwards, I won't drink. And he knew he could not stop drinking, but he was honest enough to admit that it is beyond his ability. That is a real Karpanya. So when Karpanya comes, your own feeling, you're totally helpless, you're a destitute, then Atma Niksheba, self-surrender automatically happens. Again, this happens not as a conviction, as an inner, deeply felt experience. And that will be the beginning of a new life for a person who practices Prapatti. It's called Prapanna.
Yeah. Maharaj, in this pantheon of all Indian philosophies, Nimbar, Kant, everybody,
Yeah.
it appears to me, please correct me, is that each stage is for different kind of people. When
That's
you
true.
talk about
That's true.
bad thought, it depends on the stage of the tendency or temperament of the individual. They all have value for various kinds of people. Now, if people like Sri Girish Chandra Ghosh or many of us, if when bad thoughts come, as you say, Shankara said, allows it, but because it doesn't bother you.
But remember, that is for Advaita.
Advaiti.
And remember, every Advaita may not appeal to everyone.
Yes.
So people, I tell you, I want to make this clear. People frequently ask this question, why so many philosophers? Then I tell them, it's a huge subcontinent with today has 1.4 billion people. And every village has its own temple. Every family has its own deities, its own room, worship room. And there is no one can say you worship this way. In India, in social practices, there are taboos, there are restrictions. But in religious practices, no one will blame you because you are worshipping Ganapati instead of Ganesh, instead of Subramanya. No one will bother you. It's left to you. There were exceptions in the case of Ramanuja, who was persecuted by a Shaiva king. There are very, very rare exceptions. Very rarely it happened within Hinduism. Just one exception in Indian history that you find is Ramanuja's own experience when his followers were persecuted by a Shaiva king, we call it Krimikala. He's a Shaivite king who persecuted Ramanuja's followers. But that is a very, very rare exceptional incident. In Indian tradition, Hindu tradition, there was no persecution of any sect because they followed different deity, worship God in a different way. So this is the explanation for the mind-boggling diversity of systems of philosophy, different practices, and all that. Another thing, once you understand Advaita, then you can digest all this. Advaita is like a huge coat with thousands of pockets. So whatever you can carry, you can put in all pockets. There are many things can be put in if you have a big coat. If you have just one shirt, one t-shirt with one pocket, you can't carry much. So once you understand Advaita, then you can accommodate everything. That's why in the Mandukikara it says, Susiddhanta Vyavasthasu Doitino Nishchita Dridam Parasparam Viruddhande Tairayam Na Viruddhade. This Advaita has no quarrel with anyone. Others who have just one path, they fight among themselves. But Advaita is a big coat. You can put Ramanuja system in one pocket, Madhva in another pocket, Sankhya in another, Buddhism in another. All right, you don't worry because you can still accommodate many more things. So once you understand Advaita, then study other systems of philosophy. You have no problem, no conflict. Okay, yeah, next question. Yeah.
So the Vishishtadvaita, the followers of Ramanujacharya, who has Tamil scripture, I presume they still accept Veda Pramana. Which one wins? Veda is always supreme?
No, the Ramanujas believe both are equally valid testimony. Both are Pramanas. The Nalayira Prabandhas and also this Suti, what you call so Vedas. But the point is, outside that particular region, people may not have access to this original vernacular devotion literature. But Vedas are studied and taught and contemplated upon by people all over India. That's why, that's the only difference. So it's called Ubhaya Vedanta. Actually, the teachings of the great Arvas they were not in contradiction to the teachings of the Vedas, not at all. They were not in contradiction. Many Advaitic truths can be found in all the Arvas teachings you find. So Ramanuja, Advaitic teaching, Vishishtadvaita, but mostly they were devotional, so closer to Ramanuja system. But devotional, mystical ascent can take you to the highest Advaitic experience. Advaitic experience is natural, inevitable, unavoidable, inescapable goal of spiritual evolution, whatever may be the path you are taking. Not Advaita philosophy, but Advaitic experience. Remember, when you talk about Advaita philosophy, it's a doctrinal system, but Advaitic experience goes beyond doctrine. So Advaitic experience is inevitable. That's why in many of the mystical poets, mystical writings, at some stage there is this feeling of identity. Even Ramanuja system is a kind of Advaita. Ramanuja system was a kind of Advaita only. You have Vishishtadvaita.
Seeing no other hands, I'm going to expand on Sanjay's question.
Yeah.
Because he was
Thank you.
he was looking at what people might call upon in their spiritual journey. And I'm thinking back on some of the earlier talks you gave on Ramanuja and the Ramanuja system. And the point that you made was that its emergence and growth as a system had to do with circumstances at the time.
Yeah.
And that it had to do with some of the ways that the Advaita was being addressed and expounded at that time. And that kind of suggests that each time and circumstances call for these things to cycle in and out of favor.
Yeah.
So when we get to relatively modern times and the first Westerners to become Indologists was so impressed at the spirituality of the Indian subcontinent and cultures, that this whole tapestry of philosophies and cultures was so rich that it swept them away.
Yeah. No, that's true. What astounded them, especially one of the pioneers of those who took interest in Upanishadic philosophy, Schopenhauer, was Advaita. For the simple reason, and Swami Vivekananda makes this clear and he explains this interesting point. He says, why he preached only the Upanishads and non-dualistic philosophy in America and Europe. Because Swamiji, when he went back to India, many of other followers of disciples of Sri Ramakrishna questioned him. You did not teach Sri Ramakrishna's teachings and you did not preach Sri Ramakrishna. You taught Upanishads and Vedanta. Then Swamiji mentioned, he explains this, he did not bring Sri Ramakrishna's name, because if he had come to Chicago in his first address and mentioned Sri Ramakrishna, people will think, oh, here is a great saint from India. We have also made great saints in the West, so many Christian saints, mystics, just like one of those saints. So they will not take it very seriously. But what Swamiji did was, he put this Advaitic ideal, which cannot be found in any other system of philosophy. Suppose Swamiji had taught Ramanuja system. Here, no. It is not very different from the teachings of Spinoza, teachings of Augustine Aquinas, the same belief in the sanctity of revealed scriptures, the finality of Jesus Christ, and the finality of Ramanuja's own God, Vasudeva Narayana, all that is very identical. And a church and a congregation, a hierarchy, all that you find Ramanuja system. But in Advaita, there is no such hierarchy or system. Anyone can experience this inner divinity that is present in all of us. For that, you don't have to go to India. You don't have to learn Sanskrit. You have to think. If you practice the karma yoga, doing everything that we do without expecting any selfish results, then one day our mind becomes pure. Then we start thinking, what's the real nature of this world? Remember, if you start with the anthropomorphic creator God, it's very, very simple. It's almost very simple. Any kindergarten child can understand God one day sat in the morning, create this world and all these different animals, everything, finally man, and told man, you be the master of the entire creation. It was very wonderful. But instead of that, you're turning the inquiry in the other direction. What's the nature of this world? What's its nature? What am I and who am I? What's my nature? What's my real nature? This inquiry done through meditation will one day help you to realize your true nature. And that will result in a deep spiritual mystical experience that you and everything in this world, everyone in this world is a manifestation of a divine, impersonal, transcendental reality. In that respect, the whole humanity is one spiritual family. Even non-believers, atheists, agnostics also belong to the same divine manifestation. Not just those who accept God as defined in a particular book, but those who reject God also belong to the divine. So this kind of highly universal, very universal, accepting all religions but going beyond them all. Again, it is not relativism. It is not relativism. Swamiji articulated this very emphatically. It was that which Schopenhauer found in the Upanishads. So Schopenhauer writes that he felt it's a journey of his own spiritual life. Here is a non-Indian, non-Hindu, who had never been to India, who would not read Sanskrit, that he only read a translation. What happened to Emerson, who had only read Charles Wilkins' very inaccurate, imperfect translation of the Bhagavad Gita? There is enough for Emerson to write Brahma, which is actually, roughly speaking, is an English presentation of one or two verses in the second chapter of Bhagavad Gita. And Thoreau, Whitman, all others you find. So where is this attraction? Paul Brenton, living somewhere in New York, suddenly happens to read something about Ramana Maharshi and went to India, never looked back, and spent all his lifetime to spread this Advaita teaching of Ramana Maharshi. Now, that kind of thing may not happen. And again, without fanaticism, you don't have to give up your own religion. As you turn to Vedanta, you go deeper and deeper into whatever tradition you are born into. So this is very important. In the Ramananda system, you have to put this mark in a special manner. There is a, you know that, all of you know that. There are certain rituals you have to follow. Those rituals do have a significance. I fully respect and admire and revere those practices. But Advaita goes beyond that. It doesn't reject, but goes far beyond that. So Advaita accommodates, accepts, and goes beyond all that. Again, I would say it is not relativism. Yeah. Thank you for the question. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu